Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's fifth session, our knowledge series on team building and scaling up. Before we begin, I'll just give you a quick background on Indian Angel Network. So IAN is India's first and one of the largest angel investor groups with 450 plus investors from across the country and some from overseas. IAN's operations are spread across 6 cities in India and with regular pitch sessions. It has a portfolio of about over 180 companies between the fund and the network. And it invests in multiple geographies and multiple sectors. We've also launched a fund of our own of 350 crores. And the network invests in deals up to 6 crores. One of the most important factors to build a successful startup is to build a strong team. And you want to be surrounded by the people who are the best in their field. And how do you identify them? How do you attract them to your company? How do you coach them and mentor them? How do you find the best mentors and advisors for your startups? These are some of the points which we will be covering today. And I'd like to introduce you to our esteemed speaker today, Mr. Venkat Raju. He is an accomplished serial entrepreneur with 3 exits, 2 in Silicon Valley and 1 in Bangalore. He's also a seasoned corporate executive and has led large organizations at Fortune 500 corporations spanning multiple industries. Select roles include Chief Data Officer of Merrill Lynch, Senior Vice President Products at Vertical Net, Chief Architect at British Telecom, Managing Director APAC for ACI Worldwide, based out of the US, Europe, and APAC. As a technology evangelist, he's an active angel investor, advisor, and board member in startups. His current portfolio has about 55 startups. He's also an active in startup-led digital transformation and innovations ecosystems in the US and India. Mr. Venkat Raju has also served as a mentor and advisor to select funds, accelerators, and incubators. And without wasting any more time, I'd like to invite him and please share his insights.
Thank you, Shruti. Good evening, all. So I look at this topic, team building and scaling through a startup's journey. And I don't know why I was given this topic to talk about. First, I must inform all of you that I'm not a trained HR professional. All I'm going to talk about today is my own experiences as a founder entrepreneur. When I bootstrapped my startups, did some scaling for some decent exits, where I scaled a division, call it a P&L, in a public corporation from a 2 million ARR to close to 80 million ARR. And I also was part of some large global corporations where I ran large teams and do understand some of the challenges about teams and scaling, culture, and so on and so forth. Perhaps most relevant is the time I spent as a board member, advisor, mentor to several startups that are going through this build and the scale journey. And I happen to have an inside ring seat and several observations. And I thought I will share both my experiences and these observations that I have. Today's topic is about team building and scaling, not necessarily about startup scaling challenges, which is a large topic by itself. So this discussion today is confined just to the team building and the scaling aspects only, okay? With that said, let's start by stating some obvious truths. It's all about people. So regardless, I don't care what kind of company, it's a giant corporation, startup, family business, whatever, companies succeed or fail based on the people that they have. And it is very, very important how you plan your people roadmap. How do you put together teams? How do you grow? How do you bring together for a common purpose to achieve a certain mission, for example? And that is very, very important. And making sure they are in the right roles and given the right kind of responsibilities. And this is something that is fundamental for any company. And founders should be spending a lot more time thinking about the people aspects, not necessarily individuals and functional roles, but like overall, what do I have to do to make sure my company is going to be successful with the talent that I have? Second one that's very important is culture. And this means different things to different people. Let me give you my definition of that. It is something to do with the values you live by, the principles you operate by. As somebody, Drucker and others said, culture trumps strategy. I would extend it to it trumps execution, it trumps pretty much product market fit, and so on and so forth. It is very, very important that you get the right culture. Now, there is no such thing as a right culture and a wrong culture. Certainly, one can think about a wrong culture, yes. Divisiveness and people misaligned, politics and so on and so forth. But when it comes to the right culture, it is something very unique for your own organization. You need to think about what is right for me. It should be a reflection of the brand that you are developing. It should be a reflection on the vision that you set for yourself. It is part of the core DNA of the founding team, for example. Yes, all these things evolve, but there are certain core aspects and the fundamental values and principles a company ought to live by. And as you scale up, make sure that new people coming on board are part of the same culture and get assimilated. True, they will bring their own experiences, but make sure that this culture is something that's very important. And we'll touch on this a little more in detail later, and hopefully during the Q&A. So again, people and culture is extremely important. And I don't care what kind of company it is, that's something you need to spend a lot of time thinking about. Now, is there one grand strategy on how to build teams and scale up successfully? Is there a silver bullet? I don't think so. If so, most companies will be succeeding very well. Clearly, there have been failures. There are failures every day. And it's a question of getting a perspective of the various issues, challenges, things that you have to be ready for, prepared for, to make sure that your building and scaling goes smooth for your organization. So I will take the next few minutes to talk about some of these factors, items, and they may seem kind of disparate. Bear with me. I will try and bring them all together towards the end of my discussion, and hopefully we can go delve deeper into during the Q&A. Team building. Obviously, it depends on what stage you are in. Clearly, the building for when you are like a 2-person team versus when you are a funded company versus when you are a scale-up organization, it varies. So let me explain. Let's assume you are a tech product startup, for example. So that means during the initial phase, it is going to be very technology centric. That means your team is all about the technical team and pretty much nobody else. And then you are moving into this product phase where hopefully you're bringing in enough domain experts and these technology team together to make sure that the technology is translated into a product that is somebody willing to pay for. It is something of value, for example. And so at this stage, it is still very much very technocentric with certainly product coming in. And then you go through this journey for achieving product market fit. That's where you bring in some talent associated. When I say bring in, not necessarily new hires, but you're going to be wearing multiple hats. Okay, the product management person is going to do some of the product marketing aspects of it in terms of positioning, getting market feedback, finding the first set of customers, identifying if there is how to achieve product market fit, and so on and so forth. So it is still very much technology and product marketing focused, less so on, let's say, brand marketing. Once you cross the product market fit stage, and now you say, okay, I have clearly identified my customer segment, the market segment. So clearly there is going to be some level of marketing now coming into play, brand marketing. And then you are you captured the market, you want to scale up. Clearly you are in a scale up mode. So you need the right mindset for each one of these stages and make sure your team is continuing to grow along these dimensions as the company progresses forward. Now, obviously, in parallel are the resource constraints. And pretty much take the same example of these tech product companies. The meager resources that you have, you're going to be investing in engineers first, then product managers, product marketing people, then comes sales, operations, finance. although you as a founder would have been wearing multiple hats in terms of filling in for finance and operations, but I'm just saying the kind of people you would bring for their functional specialties would follow this same kind of journey. Now, let me make a point here, and this is very, very important in terms of building a team and at what time you need to bring what kind of people in. We all know startups fail when they run out of money. But what is not so well known is startups poised for great success also fail when they have too much money. Let me explain. So every startup that is going through these stages, it is clearly raising money, and no point it should be raising more money than it can optimally spend. The danger of having more money than you can optimally spend is some of the rigor and the discipline that you would have in the organization in terms of hiring, going into a market before product market fit is achieved. All those things happen. When that happens, you make the wrong hires and you hire people before they are needed. Let me explain. If the product is not quite ready, it is possibly in a MVP stage or slightly over MVP, and nobody can sell that better than the founders. Now, if you hire a very good salesperson, that person may not have the collateral and the content and the product readiness for him or her to be efficient. Now, that's going to cause friction. You are unnecessarily spending money on that person, but it is also adding to the friction and all the cultural issues that would come. Similarly, think about if you're a hardware company, do I want to make sure, when do I hire the operations person? So the timing of hiring is very important. Now, if you're an underfunded company, this is not an issue at all because you are going to be investing your meager amounts on the must-have resources. But the danger of if you have raised more money than needed, this is something you should watch out for. Okay, let's switch gears here. Business models drive how you should think about building and scaling your teams. So B2C versus B2B. If it's B2C centric, clearly it is marketing heavy. And unless if one of the co-founders is a marketing person, this is something a very, very important hire. And you have to make sure that the leader you bring on board, either if it's you or like somebody you bring on board, is somebody who can scale that organization, because that initial hire is critical. Over a period of time, if the person doesn't scale up, you may think about bringing in more senior people, but during this early build and the early scale stage, it's absolutely critical. Certain functions, depending on the nature of the business. I'll bring up another example, software versus hardware. If you're a hardware company, you're doing designing and manufacturing, you need to be thinking accounting for, the supply chain, inventory. So that means somewhere in the founding team or one of the initial hires, you need somebody with that kind of background, operations centric, to make sure things get done right. And they would put in the processes and other things to manage suppliers. If you're like outsource the manufacturing, how to manage them, etc. So it all depends on what type of company and what the initial hires are going to be. And those are absolutely critical hires. If you go wrong, it'll set you back by months, if not years. So I would encourage you to think through, step back, depending on what kind of company you are running in. So for example, you're running a product SaaS company versus a typical professional services company. One is embarking on a non-linear journey. Other one is a linear growth. Clearly the skills that you need, the people you want, and the processes and other things, that systems you are going to be put in place is going to vary widely. And having that appreciation is what is right for me and what kind of processes and systems, what kind of people I need at going through each one of these stages is something you want to think about. Same with like if you are a typical company that is building and marketing and selling it yourself versus let's say you're a pure IP company. That means you're licensing a technology for others to go build whatever. That means your job is a lot more simpler. You're going to be investing in much more like on the researchers and the scientists and the technologists, and don't have to worry about all things. So the point I'm making here is there is be appreciative about the nuances, understand your business model, and that should dictate your build and the scale up journey for your teams. Also, you need to have clarity. Am I filling gaps for a certain functional role? I talked about, say, product marketing, or I am bringing on somebody to open up a new market. Uh, we are two young founders. Are we bringing someone for the experienced person, like let's say the adult in the room? That kind of clarity is very, very important, because it is either you're compensating the person with uh, very resource constrained cash or with equity. But that kind of clarity is very, very important, saying like, what am I getting for the value that this person is bringing in? And when you don't have that level of clarity, disappointment happens on both sides, and that's very dangerous. So please spend the time, think through, put together a high level org structure. Hopefully you will have a good advisor mentor to kind of guide you in this, not just saying, look, how is this org structure going to evolve from now over the next 6 months? How is it going to look in 12 months and 18 months? And that should be aligned in support of the strategy and the vision you should have established. And make sure you get proper guidance saying which are the critical roles and where do you need to put the resources. The other area I would think about as you slowly build up is when you're small, probably you're all sitting in one room talking to each other. The communication gap is relatively small, but as you scale up, as new employees come on board, what you could get away with lack of process, what you could get away with tribal knowledge, that means like, this expertise buried in somebody's head. Now, that doesn't translate well. That means the person coming on board has to wait for somebody to impart the knowledge and the wisdom. It takes forever. Think about the loss of productivity, the opportunity cost. So when I talk about get ready for scaling up, it is building means it's building a team is not just about hiring the right person, but making sure the people coming on board are going to be productive as soon as possible. They can hit the road running. Another thing you had to think about, when people talk about scale, it is always about growth, which is true. But every time you are adding, make sure there is some subtraction as well. I mean, it will be a wonderful place if everybody is pulling the weight, everybody is performing, but unfortunately it's not so. So building and scaling also implies that you are also trimming fat. You are letting go of poor performers, because it is very important for a company and especially for the employees. Trust me on this. Some founders, some CEOs I've seen hesitate about potential moral impact. If I let go of some people, how is the rest of the team going to react? And in my experience, what I've seen is, look, people work together as a team. But when they see some slackers, when they see some people getting away, in fact, you are taking an action against them, the morale actually goes up. So forget the stage. I think you have to take corrective action in the best interest of the company. And if you're worried about morale, don't, because I think it sends a very powerful message that good performance is appreciated, and people can count on the leadership and management support, if you will. Okay, switching gears. There are some blind spots on the part of a founder CEO. And it's very important that one does not conflate or confuse oneself with the company. Maybe it is true at the early stages, like your interests and the company's interests are probably 100% aligned, and one and the same. The decisions you make are likely to be in the best interest of the company and yourself. But as you grow, as you scale up, decisions you make on hiring, decisions uh, that you do, for example, um, if, for example, you yourself is not the right CEO, you are not scaling up, perhaps you continuing in that role is not going to help the company realize the full potential. There needs to be a level of self-awareness about this, and it's a very touchy subject. The point is, a lot of founders recognize this aspect, but they do not want to let go because they feel a loss of control, loss of prestige. And it is very important that hopefully if you have a good mentor and advisor who can tell you, nobody can take the title of founder away from you. It is your company. If it's going to succeed, you're going to be recognized for it. And the ability to separate oneself from the company and what is in the best interest of the company as you're building teams, as you're scaling up, is something for you to reflect on, think about. The second one comes around biases. We all like to think we are objective. We do not have bias. We all do. I certainly do. It is subconscious. And what happens is, like some of the stories you hear at, like what happened at Uber, for example, that culture is because of that bias. They went and hired people around the same image of the founder. And it caused a lot of problems, serious problems for the company down the line. So consciously think about, and you need to look for diversity. I'm talking not necessarily gender diversity, but look for people who are different, a different point of view. And this is especially so when it comes to founders. And I will touch on that because that's an important topic by itself. Co-founders, I spend so much time talking to startups. I ask, okay, when did you guys meet? Oh, we know we are, childhood friends, went to the same school. I said same subject. And then like, that worries me. Okay, the good news is these guys know each other, the friends, and it's good because during tough times, friendship matters. They'll hang together. The downside is they're likely to think alike. And the synergies that would come across with complementary backgrounds and diversity is lost, which means they are forced to go hire one extra person to fill that role. And so that's a downside. But the point I'm making especially is when you are building and scaling, you have to consciously be aware of this bias problem. Look for diversity. And especially when you're scaling into new markets, new geographies, the cultural aspects come into play. And unless you have that experience, count on a mentor and an advisor who's been there to help you in that. Another one is the loyalty towards the initial team. And that's very important because there is something special about that initial founding team and the initial team that was hired, maybe like the first 5 people, first 10 people. Reality is some people scale with the scale of the organization and are able to grow. Others less so, which means in your heart that the person is unlikely to scale and that function is going to suffer, which means you need to bring on somebody from the outside to head on top of that person. What would that person think? Okay, he was right there, right from the start. What am I going to do? Again, the only way you can do this is have this policy and the principle right from day one, or at least as soon as possible. Have this conversation with the entire team and saying, every decision we make here, and certainly decisions around people and org structures and hierarchies, hiring, etc., is one question: what is in the best interest of the company? And lay out clear principles. So there is objective principles, clarity, and it is better to have candid conversations upfront in terms of what the expectations for the role is going to be, so that it is not an issue when you choose if the person is not scaling up, you are bringing on somebody on top. So these are some things to think about during the build phase. Let's switch gear a little into the scaling phase. So now you are like probably at a series B, looking ahead. You are scaling by geographies, perhaps new product lines, new verticals, new markets. Uh, this is the time where you need to have a very strong handle on the unit economics. That means very strong, somebody very strong with the numbers, for example. That means I'm successful in this city and I'm going to go into that city. Okay, it makes sense. What is the true unit economics? What is the fixed cost? What's the variable cost? Do I have a complete handle on that before you replicate? Means if I don't have that skill, what kind of people do I need to bring on board? And that is very important. One, for that new city or the new market you're going into, but internally, do I have the person with the numbers and the capability to make sure that they understand scale, where I have this product, I'm going to go into a new, I'm working on this vertical, I'm going into the next vertical. What does it cost? One of the mistakes people do is, this is how much it costs for me to go into this manufacturing vertical, and tomorrow I'm going into retail. Problem is, do not make the assumption just because you achieve product market fit in one geo or one vertical that you can replicate the same success elsewhere. Which means you have to go through the same journey in terms of A/B testing, product, the approaches, whatever you would have done in price discovery, product market fit. So make sure you or somebody in the team is aware of all these implications. Somebody who's been there, done that, or at least have an advisor. Now, this is where I want to talk about, because as a company in the early stages, you may not have all the skills and the experience. And obviously you don't have the money to bring on board senior people. And the company is lacking credibility also to entice the right kind of people. And it's absolutely important that you rope in advisors who are going to be guiding you with this functional knowledge, as well as mentors who are like more like a guide, if you will, to kind of look for these landmines and take you forward over a period of time. And these are absolutely critical when you want to go raise money. Any investor is going to look at the leadership team and identify the gaps. To the extent you are able to say, look, I have these advisors and mentors and I will formalize it soon. And what starts off as informal mentor advisor engagements, you need to think about turning that into a professional advisory board. Not only in addition to the formal board, think about the advisory board and carefully select people who can continue to add value as the company scales up. Let me talk about few things that you should be aware of when you are scaling. Okay, everything is going well, you raised a lot of money, the products are humming, you understood the markets you're going. Scaling too fast is something that you have to be very, very aware of. I've seen so many companies when they pull the trigger when they're not quite ready. That means they went into a new market without fully understanding the market, has spent a lot of money and regrets, and that actually sets the entire company back. And when you are under pressure, this hiring, I need to fill this position. I've seen phrases like, even if that body is half dead, I might as well fill that position because it's a critical position to fill. Wrong. The mistakes you do in filling the wrong person is not only causing all other internal issues and the person is not performing, but it sets the company back months. And the senior that person is, it's going to be worse. And I myself have made mistakes in the hiring of VP of sales, not once, twice, but thrice. And it set me back at least 1 year or 18 months in terms of a certain market I was going after. So it's very important you spend the time, think through. I know the pressures you will be under, but be very, very careful and let not pressure and speed needs dictate making wrong hires against your own best judgment. It scaling also sometimes forces companies to lose focus, what their original mandate was, mission was. So somehow, oh, that seems like a great opportunity. Let's go after that. Let's go here. And this is where you need, really to step back. And hopefully by then you should have a pretty strong board to kind of guide you and making sure you're making the right decisions. And this is the time, if not already, um, some of us happen to be control freaks. Nobody else can do this better than I do. I need to make sure I need to approve everything that's going on. And that's impossible. That means as part of the building process, hopefully you have delegated, hopefully you hired the right people, and making sure that the scaling up happens with you not being a bottleneck. All these things are very, very important. And there are some general guidance when it comes to team building and scaling up, I would like to point out. One is, if you are the founder and the CEO, look at the time you're spending in your own activities with the company. A good 30% should be spent in hiring or building teams, which means hiring means you are not doing the mechanics of the recruitment and the agreements, etc., but you are filling the pipelines. You have the vision of what the organization structure is going to be, the critical roles, the critical gaps, and you need to be nurturing potential candidates. And it is like building a pipeline of potential leads for sales or potential leads for investment. You need to have potential a pipeline for such candidates and nurturing. And this is a important exercise, and make sure you are spending at least 30% on this. The other thing I would say is very important is communication. It is one thing when you are a small company, everybody knows everybody and what everybody else is doing. But as you're scaling up, if you do not have the right kind of communication, I'm talking internal communication, who is doing what for what purpose, and what is the company's mission, what are the updates, what is the most important priority for this coming quarter. All these things are very important. Err on the side of over communication, because as you scale up, what you would assume, okay, everybody knows, in truth it doesn't, and that causes a lot of friction. So I would say, think about putting a nice internal communication system, team communication, top-down communication, bottom-up communication, 360 degrees. Okay, so I'm thinking. So let's bring it all together here. Building and scaling obviously depends on the business model, depends on the stage of the company. But as you're scaling, I would say be very, very deliberate. Do not pull the trigger. Do not make hasty decisions because of pressure of market or something. Now, there are times, for example, you may think about organic growth versus inorganic. Okay, I'm going into this market. I am probably acquire this company. And I've done that too. And it's very important you think through not only about the potential fit of the products and the other synergies that a company that you intend to acquire has, but also think in terms of the cultural aspects and what is going to be the implication on both sides, and have you really taken through, make sure the CEO of the other company, somebody you can spend enough time and think through. Because in this rush towards speed for scaling, I've seen companies make some very, very bad acquisitions, and it brings down the entire company. So in short, be very, very deliberate about it. And the final comment I would have is have a chief CHRO. Obviously, you can't afford such a person initially and not justify it initially. As an advisor, mentor, in the advisory board once you hit a certain stage, potentially a Series A stage. Somebody who can guide you from a people perspective, team perspective, scaling, bringing in all the non-functional software aspects, which are absolutely critical that you need to think about. So with that, let me end my initial comments and open this up for Q&A. Because I like interactive sessions rather than me sitting and putting some slides and talking about it. Let's discuss these concepts in the context of your own companies and your own situations. Back to you, Shruti.
So, Mr. Venkat, there's a slight change. Shruti is facing a little bit of technical difficulty, so I'm just
okay. Sure.
I'll request all the founders on the call to start sending in their questions. I know we've received a couple right now, but while the questions come in, I had 2 questions for you before we dive into that.
Yep.
You mentioned, I know when we were talking during the week, about how culture is very important to an organization.
Yep.
So you spoke about it briefly right now, but I just wanted to dive a little bit more in depth on that topic in terms of, first of all, what is the right culture, for an organization.
Right.
And then how does a founder or a founding team go ahead, create it, build it, and then maintain it for the long run, right? It's not just your initial vision, but you have to make sure it sustains as you grow your venture.
Right. So. Okay, great question. Let's take some examples, some large companies, and they all been startups before, at least in my lifetime, and grown, and they stuck to it. So for example, take Google. And I know the founders when they started, and forget what they said, like do no evil and etc. for whatever purpose. But it was always an engineering-driven culture. That means developers remain supreme, and it is a fact even to this day. It's a multi-billion-dollar giant. Take Apple. Steve Jobs talked about design, and Steve Jobs is no longer there, but Apple still goes by that. Take Amazon, operational excellence. So don't get me wrong. I mean, any successful company needs to have great products, great design, excellent engineering, operational excellence. That's all true, but something stands out in each one of these companies. Or take Tesla. It's about innovation. So that means there is something about that company and the culture that is what the founders set and the initial founding team. And hopefully for the company to succeed, people with that mindset needs to go there. It does not mean, I'm a design guy, so I should not go to Google. No, that's not the point. But you have to understand and appreciate, all said and done, it is an engineering culture company, and would I fit in there, and so on. So that like somebody joining the company should be aware of that. Equally, the person recruiting needs to be aware of these things and make sure that anybody they bring on board fits well. And as I said, there is no such thing as a one right culture, but clearly there are things around wrong culture. So that means there is backbiting, there is politics, there are people like talking or they are not communicating, these personal fiefdoms, and so on and so forth. Clearly that tells that there is misalignment. The incentives are not aligned with the company, and very bad workplace, because if people do not feel good every morning, coming into work, even including from work, working from home, it is a bad culture. Now, what is a right culture? As I said, there's a core DNA of the company. There is something about the brand of your company, and then the culture, the values and the principles. So, for example, now for me personally, in all the organizations, whether it's large or my own startups, where I had a say, I lived by certain set of values, for example, and it was good for me regardless of the size of the company or the space the company operated in. And let me explain. These are like top 5 values for me: ownership, teamwork, open and direct communication, excellence, and customer centricity. What I mean by each one of this is ownership means every person, including the junior most person hired, should have a sense of self-ownership. So that means pride and authorship of his or her own work. And there is a no excuses based mentality to get things done of whatever he or she is responsible. Because ownership is not something the owners or the promoters or the founders have or the senior leadership. It should pervade the organization. And that is one trait I live by. Or I really strongly believe in that, because when we talked about delegation required for scaling up the company, delegation does not happen, or the founder is not going to cede control unless he or she feels there's a sense of ownership on the part of everybody there. It is not going to be flawless. It is not always going to be as good as what the founder did. But if that sense of the mindset, the ownership mindset is there, people will figure out a way to get things done, and or at least come and ask for help. Second is teamwork. And for me, it's absolutely important. I come across some prima donnas, like, some superstars. And at least for me, superstars are great. Maybe if they are out in an island and doing some remote work for the company, it's great. Otherwise, teamwork is what I count on. That means people are take care of each other. I have your back. And it also brings in the synergies and the diversity, which I talked about, where you assemble not necessarily hierarchically, okay, this is product management, this is engineering, this is customer service and support. But imagine from each one of those, you create these small teams coming together for a stated purpose. So for example, I don't know what kind of frameworks you guys do for project management and execution, make sure things get done on time. But for example, one of the most successful methodologies happens to be these OKRs. OKRs by definition is you're bringing together a small team for a limited time to get things done. And they are in this together, either sink or swim together. And for me, that is something very important. Open and direct communication. Let me talk about this a little more. This is one of my favorite topics while spending time with founders here in India. Now, I'm a Desi, born and raised in India, but spent bulk of my life abroad. And one of the biggest challenges I found coming back was around this issue of open and direct communication. It is our cultural thing. We do not want to give bad news, or we sugarcoat bad things. It is not deliberately hiding things or lying, but it is like you do not want to give unpleasant news. And for me, this is a big problem. Open and direct communication basically crystallizes. It basically helps cut through all the noise, because if we have the bad news, can we as a team come together and solve it? And this is very important. Some of the things around backbiting and other things I talked about happens when there is a lack of open and direct communication. So when I talked about the internal communication, it is not just about company updates and strategies, but if there are problems, go head on and talk about it openly. But the way it should be done is in a way where it is not personal. It is about a situation. It's about a company problem. And I've seen my product managers and engineers, really yelling and screaming about something, then later go out in the evening having a beer together. And that is what I like in terms of the right culture, if you will. Excellence. Again, no compromise on quality. So if you have the sense of ownership, this jugaad we talk about, and some people take great pride in that. I do not happen to be a believer. Now, you happen to could be a believer and you can run your company that way. I'm only stating what I feel or is part of my culture or the culture I would like to promote. For me, excellence means no jugaad, okay? No compromise. And customer centricity, and that goes without saying. So I just gave you an example of how I think about culture in a company if I were running it. So there is the brand aspect, the core DNA aspect, some of the values and the principles you live by, and bringing the whole team together. And this is what culture for me. That means if I'm thinking about hiring somebody senior, I want to make sure that the person indeed is going to fit, because if the person is not going to fit, the most qualified person is not somebody I'm going to hire. So I don't know if that answered the question.
Very much so. Thank you so much, Mr. Venkat. So we've already started getting a whole host of questions. I think let's do justice to those. I'm going to group some of them because they're alike in terms of the theme.
Okay.
The first one is on co-founders. A very important one as you begin your venture. And
yes.
I've imagined quite a few questions on that. So we have founders asking, I'm a single founder looking for a co-founder. How do you find the right fit? And then a few more have asked on how do you evaluate a co-founder other than technical skills? So especially if you don't know them, the person previously. So how do you evaluate them?
Okay. This is a good topic. Husband and wife team as co-founders. You probably see that in most family businesses. You see that in lifestyle businesses. But if you are planning a venture-backed business, please do not do that. It is a red flag. Certainly on the part of some investors, they say, if it's a husband and wife team, the great of the companies, I'm not going to invest. I already touched on the need for diversity and complementary skills, which means if you're a single founder, it's most important you find a co-founder. Because that's another huge red flag from an investor perspective, but much more so for your own growth of the company, because it's only so much you can do, and it's a very lonely place as a founder. You need someone to kind of hang out with, share the burden, and continue on this journey. So it's very, very critical. So I strongly encourage complementary, synergistic opposites. The question was, how do I find the right person? So if you're a technology person, please go find somebody with the right domain background, or vice versa. If you're a technology company, or depending on the nature of the company, make sure what are the key functional attributes that are required at the initial stage of the company, and make sure you put that profile well together and utilize your personal network and reach out to people. So the question there was, how do I assess who's the right fit? Obviously, there are no guarantees. There's no assured way of doing it. Now, if you're a domain person and you're looking for a technical co-founder, you can certainly get the help of some technical specialists to check out their technical capabilities. But for me personally, choosing a co-founder is about chemistry. It is as important. You probably are going to be spending more time with this person than your own spouse. That means, do I have chemistry with this person? So all the other things I talked about, complementary skills, everything is must have. But this is the clinching factor. If you don't have chemistry, if you're not happy spending time with the person, don't do it. So that is the single most important factor I would think of. While on this topic of co-founders, there are certain things that you have to do systematically. So get a founders agreement done, because everything is great initially, but if things go wrong, one of the biggest issues is founder breakups. So that means at least if such a breakup happens, what are the formalities? And so there is clarity. And this, you can apply that to the initial team also. And so I would encourage certain, both the softer aspects I talked about, but also things like founders agreement in place.
Thank you, Mr. Venkat. So our next question is more on equity, building on, since you talked about early team members. So Again, I'm going to group them. So a founder is asking, as an early stage startup and having no investment for salary, what should be my equity-based hiring strategy, and how should I motivate my team members? It is tricky because if they really want to build a good team, they would expect a good salary. So
Right.
how do they deal with that? And we have some founders asking, what are the general principles on issuing equity? Does everyone get equity? Is it mandatory to offer one?
Right. So again, this is my own personal bias. If I am starting a company, I strongly believe, you remember, you may recall the talk about sense of ownership. Sense of ownership comes when every person feels that they are an owner in the company. Even if it's a small fraction, at least in all the companies, all the startups that I have built, every single employee had an equity stake. Even if it's a token, it is highly appreciated. And obviously you need to have a clean policy in terms of who gets what, how much, etc. And that is something some of the experts can give you more, but at least my philosophy is this. Now there's a big difference between, I've seen equity models change between US and Europe and certainly in India. And so at the initial stage, clearly the co-founders have obviously significant equity ownership and probably they are working for free. Even the initial founding team has been brought in for that sense of mission together, which means they gave up like cushy jobs, higher compensation for a new journey here. Obviously, they have to be compensated for it. The way I look at this, and it also varies by functions. For example, the initial founding team is pretty clear. I mean, it is like, there is definitely equity and the cash compensation is based on like the resources in the company, how much money you have. But as you are scaling up, you're going to bring in senior talent. And at least when the investors come on board, if you yourself have not done it already, they are going to be demanding, okay, what is the ESOP? Is it at least 10%, 15%? In my philosophy, it would have been much larger, but setting that aside, there is some kind of a percentage. Now, the way I would negotiate are, at least during the initial stages, I'm now talking closer to Series A, okay, is you want to bring on a VP of sales. You want to bring on a chief marketing officer. One, obviously, I still want to bring on board people who are believers in the company, which means they're willing to sacrifice something to get on board. So to entice them, I would structure the compensation discussion like this. I'll say, let's take the total compensation is so much. One option could be cash heavy and equity less. Another option could be cash less and equity heavy. And depending on whether it is a director level person or a VP level person or like an associate, obviously it changes. If it's an associate, chances are they need the cash for for their expenses, etc. But overall, I would put together a model where compensation structure across each levels and give two options: cash heavy versus equity heavy. Then there are certain functions. For example, normally if it's a product person or an engineering person, you want to make it more equity heavy and less cash. If it's a salesperson, it is very cash heavy and a token equity. And because most salespeople are driven by cash and they also work based off commission. So that means there's a base component and then like based on the sales that they close, there's a commission component. So since they're benefiting a lot in the cash side of things, most companies I know of compensate salespeople, including the senior salespeople, with less equity compared to their counterparts in product or engineering elsewhere. I don't know if I answered that question, but at least my personal philosophy, I do believe in having this ownership. That means every single employee in the company gets equity.
Thank you, Mr. Venkat. Another question that's coming through is, how long would you give an employee who is not being able to deliver to nurture and teach them and let them learn? And at what point do you decide that you want to let them go?
Good question. So, which means this entire thing should be very objective and the eyes of all employees fair. Now, I know you're a startup, you may not have the resources, HR resources, etc., to put in, performance reviews and KPIs and measurement, etc. But you need to have frequent conversations. It is not once a quarter or, or once every 6 months, but every person should be made aware of where they stand. Do they have clarity on their role? How well is aligned with the company strategy and the priorities? And what is expected of them? And this should be pretty clear and unambiguous. And it is not subject to, it is like very, very clear. And you need to have regular conversations. When you're a small company, you should be able to have such discussions with almost every person. But as you scale up, I talked about putting some processes, make sure, all these things are captured. Now, when it comes to performance, how long do you wait? Obviously, different companies have different policies. You have to give them some kind of a notice. If they shape up well, it's okay. If they don't, after the notice period, if their performance is still not good, then you move on. But for me, this is a continuous process. You may recall when I talked about scaling up, it is not always just addition. Sometimes you are adding by subtracting. So it is a continuous process. And this is my personal philosophy, is for the good of the company, you cannot tolerate poor performance despite being given chances. So I would err on the side of cutting sooner than later.
Got it. Thank you. Another question, just building on the equity piece, is a founder wants to know what should the percentage allocation be for in terms of equity for a team. So what would the total amount that you would allocate for your team be?
It depends on the stage of the company. Okay, so if you are starting and your team is very small, probably you are like 3-4 people. Obviously, there is something for the CEO, the CTO. Maybe there is somebody else running some couple of important functions. Maybe there's a architect and so on. So at this stage, it's pretty much under your control. But what you have to think about is, how long do I want this company, this person in this company? Because it's going to be a long journey. It is going to be a 7 to 10 years journey, perhaps. That means how much money am I going to raise? How many rounds? 3, 4, 5 rounds? What kind of dilution is going to happen? What is even, so in the best case scenario, what's the exit valuation going to be? And what percentage of the company is that person going to hold? And in the worst case scenario, what's going to happen? And you need to have a perspective of, or everyone has to have a perspective. For me to be toiling hard for less compensation, cash compensation, and all those things, what is it going to be like? What are my exits going to be? When the exit happens, how much am I going to get? So there has to be a high level sense, and you need to compensate people with that in mind. So project it 5-7 years ahead. What is the best case, worst case scenario? Worst case scenario is a bad scenario, but I'm saying the good and the bad medium scenario. And then like work backwards, saying what should each person get at this stage? Again, this is not science. This is like based on like what in your judgment is the right allocation.
All right, thank you. Now you touched upon this point on the next question, where you spoke about a husband and wife being co-founders in a company. So the founder is asking, in US, a husband and wife company is a big red flag, but is there the same scenario in India as well, which you confirmed? But the follow-on question to that is, even if both have very successful careers earlier and have complementary talents required for a startup success, so what would your advice to them be, given that they want to still continue together as co-founders in their business?
Obviously, it's their decision. They need to be mindful about how the outside world is going to think. Personally, I do not mix my personal side and business side. I deliberately try and keep it separate. So that way, any issues in the business is not going to go and affect my personal life and vice versa. So this is what I feel. But if that team, that husband and wife team, feel very strongly about this, they had to make a very convincing case. And maybe the first thing they have to do is, okay, we are a husband and wife team, but as far as business is concerned, we are going to be running it like this. Here is the founders agreement, formalized. And this is how we plan to run the company. The issues I see is, for example, with the rest of the employees. Let's say I am reporting to the wife and I have some issues. I want to escalate it to the husband, or vice versa. I'm reporting to the guy and I need to escalate to the lady who happens to be the CEO. Am I going to be so open compared to if it was that relationship did not exist? Because you have to think through what is in the best interest of the company. Any of these relationships, is that going to hinder proper communication, escalations, candid conversations? Then it is not good. So if they feel so strongly about it, they need to think through all these things, in addition to how the perception by the external, the investor community, customers, etc. That's something that can be managed, but I'm much more worried about their own internal dynamics. Anything here impacting personal life and impact blowing back here, and the impact on other employees.
Thank you so much. Now we're going back to the questions on advisory board and co-founders. One is on the advisory board. So we are currently beginning to build our advisory board. You've touched upon this for sure, but if you could throw some more light, that would be wonderful. What are some of the pointers that you wish you knew when you were doing that for the first time?
Okay. So the single biggest mistake I did, I think I touched on that, was not having the human resource specialist or the expert. Clearly, when I started the company, payroll was outsourced, and over time, payroll benefits came in, and all these performance reviews. So the tactical aspects of HR was covered in the company. What I did not have and did not appreciate was strategic HR advice. As my company, clearly I was having conversations with my investors and various other leaders in terms of scaling to the next stage. Here is the strategy. This is the 3-year business plan. This is where we are going, and blah, blah, blah. If I had a CHRO type advisor helping me, saying, how is the organization going to evolve, the cultural aspects, the systems and the processes, how do I hire right? I did one acquisition which was like caused some problems. What are the things to watch out for before you do inorganic growth, etc., would have helped me. So certainly I made my share of mistakes. Now, coming back to the question on how do I construct an advisory board? So clearly, let's assume you are 2 co-founders. You each have complementary skills, but do you understand the market? Do you have marketing help? How you probably don't have finance wherewithal in terms of a business model, unit economics, crunching the numbers. So clearly there are going to be multiple gaps in several functional areas. So there is one type of advisor I would bring on board who would fill in certain important functional roles that you 2 founders lack and need help. Second one would be much more on, let's say if you are a serious technology research company, having somebody from academia, somebody well-known, published multiple papers, has a renown, you are bringing an instant credibility to the company that indeed this is a deep IP company and so academic advisor is behind it, blah, blah, blah. So that helps. One, it helps in terms of the perception outside, but certainly for your own product, bring on somebody who can provide you that depth if you are indeed embarking on a deep tech IP kind of company. If you're thinking about, let's say, I am building a SaaS company in India for markets in the US, clearly you need somebody out there who's been there, done that, understands that market, etc., coming into the advisory board, because that person is going to be bringing in the network and the connection. So you have to be very, very careful. And typically an advisory board, don't make it too large because it doesn't work. By the way, most advisory boards do not work properly because if you don't manage it properly, if you don't set the expectations right, and that's a big topic by itself. But I will selectively pick advisors based on one, network and the connections, instant credibility, uh, filling in the gaps, been there, done that, overall guidance. So it's a combination of all those. This is how I would structure it. And day one, these could be loose advice, informal advisors. Then you can formalize it, and you need to again think through how best am I going to incentivize these people. Chances are they are already pretty well compensated, well-to-do people. It is not as much they are coming in for the money, but it is much more something else. You need to figure out with each such person, what is the right incentive model, for example, and why would they want to spend time with you and help you, is something you need to think through and in putting together an advisory board.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Venkat. One last question is on what should the founders agreement specify or cover? You mentioned it was important to sign a founders agreement with the early team and founders. So what do you suggest?
Okay. So we all know about this. Before, some people, before getting married, do a prenuptial. So it is, imagine all the things that could possibly go wrong, and you lay that out and specify, if this happens, this happens, right? Including something goes wrong with the founder. What happens if the founder decides to walk away 2 years later? What happens to the equity? What happens? So, and there are standard templates available for such founders agreements. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but the whole philosophy here is, it's like roles and responsibilities. Who's going to do what? Who's accountable for what? So that like later, if there is a breakup happening, there is some clarity here. You agree to do this, you are accountable for that, you did not do that. So rather than finger pointing happen, there is an formalized agreement to kind of sort out through such a mess. So primarily a founders agreement is about worst case scenario.
Lovely. Just to end on a positive note, I think I'll leave one last question instead of talking about ending. So they asked, one second, I'll just quickly look for it. Yeah, so how would you motivate a potential early hire to join the team with no compensation? So how do you inspire them? How do you motivate them to buy into your...
It is about that mission and the sense of purpose. We are going to change the world. If you're a social impact company and you're saying, I'm going to go do this, obviously you have to be talking to people who are also like-minded and want to have an impact. So it is all about selling that vision, selling the purpose. Come on board, we are going to transform. Imagine how Elon Musk sells people, when he hires. Think about what the conversation is going to be like. So put yourself in that. So if you're really going to transform something or reinvent the world or having a huge impact in sustainability, whatever, go find the people where they are also wanting to do that. Then the answer is, come on board together. Let's go do it.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Mr. Venkat. You've given lots of practical insights. I think founders, I'm sure, are very, very motivated to go back to their teams, inspire them, motivate them, take them on the journey along, and maintain a positive culture so that eventually they learn to work together well and build a successful company as they scale. Thank you so very much for your insight.
Sure.
I know there are quite a few more questions that the founders have sent. Some are related to fundraising or other topics that we have. So I'd just like to mention that we're more than happy to answer them offline. If you'd like to connect with us or Mr. Venkat for any other questions that you may have, just please feel free to write. I'm leaving my email address in the chat box. Please feel free to write to me. I'll be more than happy to connect you to him. And there are other topics that are lined up for the rest of the series. So do tune in and listen in to get the rest of your questions answered if there are any specific ones on other topics. Our next session is actually going to be hosted as usual next Friday from 4 to 5:15. The topic is on business models and metrics. So it's on 16th of October at 4 o'clock. Mr. Alok Mittal, who is the co-founder and CEO of Indify Technologies, is going to be hosting this session. I'm going to again leave the registration link for you all in the chat box. Feel free to register here, or if you'd like to register at a later time, just you should be able to get access to the registration link via the social media channels as well. So thank you so very much, Mr. Venkat. Thank you to all the participants who joined us today.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.
We're looking forward to hosting it again next week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.